Hey, Word Love team, welcome back for season 2, episode 3 of the Read Write Mike podcast, where today I want to talk about in this episode the text that we suggest to go along with the character vocabulary units. And those texts are going to be fairy tales, folk tales, fables from around the world. And today I want to talk a little bit about why that was chosen, the decision to make the texts that go with the vocabulary words. I want to talk about how that these fairy tales, folk tales, and fables from around the world are used. And I want to talk about which text might you use, whether you use which specific fairy tale, folk tale, whether you use a different fairy tale, folk tale, or fable, or whether you choose your own text to connect to the words. So let's get started. We also have some bonus content today for subscribers that will give some behind the scenes look into my process of how I choose the books to go with the words and some other resources that you could use for text. All right. So big question is why? Why use fairy tales to connect to the character vocabulary when you could use any text? You could use text that go with a specific curriculum, for instance. Well, there's 4 main reasons why I decided to go with fairy tales, folk tales, and fables from around the world. And the first of those reasons is that these texts are important. Some of these books, some of these stories have been told and retold for hundreds and hundreds of years. And anything that's old and has stuck around that long has got some truth, has got something important that human beings want to pass down from generation to generation. And it's important not only just in life, but it's important to teachers. I talk to a lot of teachers too who often say, I wish kids knew some of like the common fairy tales and folk tales, or I wish they knew of them, like they knew the genre a little bit better. Now, character vocabulary is not going to be teaching into the genre so much, and you're welcome to do that on your own, but it will be a vehicle to help teach the words. So for the first reason is why these texts, they're important to know. I think also a second reason is it's innovative. Anytime you take something that's old and you make it new, you revivify it, that is the definition of innovation, is taking the thing that was old and good, but using it in a new way. And that's what we hope to do with character vocabulary, is we hope to be innovative with these texts, to teach character vocabulary and also to share these old stories from different cultures. The third reason is, well, frankly, it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty efficient. It's free, right? Because a lot of these texts, you don't have to get permissions to use them. They're just out in the public. And so there's nothing that you have to do to sort of get any permissions to use these texts. These stories are just stories that exist in the world. And any story that's sort of common that exists in the world that can be used that makes a lot of sense to use in your teaching. It's something that you don't have to kind of run around and find because the stories are at your fingertips. Oftentimes, you know the story yourself. You don't even need to get a book. You could just tell the story, right? So the fourth reason is that these texts really, in some ways, there's the opposite of the first reason. Is there it's not the first reason is they're important. The last reason is they're kind of irrelevant, because you don't have to use these texts to teach the vocabulary. You don't have to use any fairy tales, folk tales, or fables from around the world. The units are not about teaching these stories. The stories are the vehicle. The stories are the thing that you use to teach the words. The important thing we're doing here is it's vocabulary. It's the words and what the words mean. So whatever text you use, important. You should use a text. You should use a text. Definitely use a text. You don't want to have, character vocabulary floating in thin air. You don't want to have any vocabulary floating in thin air. You do want to anchor teaching your words in some sort of story, preferably. But you can use whatever text. Maybe you have a favorite read aloud where these words might appear. Maybe you have a book that goes with a particular curriculum or unit of study that you read, and these words connect to it. Then choose that text. You can do that easily with character vocabulary, as you can swap out any text because it's not about the text, it's about the words. But on the other hand, I think these texts are fun. They're important. Kids love them. So let's go recap. What are the 4 reasons? Well, it's important to read these. It's innovative to do this in a new way. They're free and easily accessible. And the fourth reason is they're sort of not that relevant too, because you can use any text that you want. Okay, so let's move on to the next part of this podcast and let's talk about, well, how are the texts used? Let's take a look at an example from the kindergarten pilot. One of the things that you'll notice is usually you'll be invited to read the text prior to teaching a particular part of the unit, right? And so that way kids have the story in their mind. This is second grade rather. And so kids will be, you'd read to the kids Chicken Little, do whatever you want with it during read aloud time, talk to it, what have you. In the curriculum, I'll usually provide a few versions, including versions that are online, so you can share it as a video loud, and then just a reminder that these books, these texts, these stories can be used, or they could be not used. You could use a different text if you wanted to. An important thing to keep in mind is you definitely want to read a text that sort of fits with your community sensibility. So any of these texts that are recommended, you always want to read them for yourself and make sure that they fit your community, your sensibilities, and the things that you believe in. Because you certainly wouldn't want to read a text cold and say, oh gosh, this text wasn't what I was hoping for. Okay, so the way that it's used, you read the text, and then when you introduce the words, in introducing the words, you give it a reference right away to this word I want to teach you appears in this book we read. So in this instance, careless, it says in Chicken Little, we learned that Chicken Little was careless when she assumed what hit her head was a piece of the sky, right? And then you go through the different steps. If you want to know more about these different steps of how to introduce the words, check out episode 2 of season 2 of the Read Write Mike podcast. So that's basically what it is you read the text prior and then you give it context to when you introduce the word. You say this word appears in this text. All right, so we've talked about why fairy tales, folk tales, and fables from around the world. We talked about how it's used in the curriculum, and now I want to talk about, well, which text could you use? I mentioned a little bit earlier. You'll notice that in any of the units I shared with you, I gave you options of different texts. So I think in kindergarten, use Little Red Riding Hood, right? And so I'll give you recommendations. If you want to go out and get a different version of a specific version of it, you can do so. A lot of these also have video louds to go with it that are free on YouTube. I also try to give a nod to if the story is a story that is also been written in different cultures, like Lan Popo is a version of Little Red Riding Hood from China. That is also an option for you too. So I always make sure that I give several different options, including options that you can view for free. And again, you just want to make sure that you read the text, right? Because some of these, I think kindergartner also uses Cinderella. So, you're going to read the Disney version. Are you going to read the classic version? Are you going to read maybe the Caribbean version of Cinderella, or maybe an updated one that's been written more recently, right? So all these options are available to you in the curriculum, including with some links. My only recommendation is just make sure that you view the videos, make sure that you read the text to make sure that they fit your community's sensibilities. And that's wise with any read aloud, right? Okay. So the last thing is like you could choose your own. If you want to choose a different fairy tale, folk tale from around the world, you could choose that. And if you subscribe, I'll show you some of that after this segment. I'll show you some areas where you could find your own fairy tales and folk tales. But the last thing is again, I just want to underscore, you don't have to use any of the fairy tales, folk tales, and fables from around the world. You could use a read aloud that you love that shows these vocabulary words. You could use a read aloud that you're reading with a particular curriculum or a particular unit of study. And as long as the word appears in the book, you could use that as your anchor. And that's the big message that I want to send today. Friends, thank you for joining us for episode 3. If you want more content, feel free to subscribe in the links below. And in that bonus content today, I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, where did I get some of these ideas for these different fairy tales, folk tales around the world? I'll talk to you a little bit about my process, like how do I connect these words to certain tales? And then I'll give you a few resources in the bonus content as well, if you want to use some of your own fairy tales and folk tales and links to things of that nature. So to keep the units and everything free, please subscribe. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy all of the resources and this podcast, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.